Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another Thursday home theater hangout with me and Matt Poes from Poes Acoustics on YouTube. So if you're not subscribed to Matt, go over there, subscribe to Matt. But this is our third podcast about how to build a spare room into a home theater. We tackled room acoustics in the first episode. The second one was flooring and risers. Today we're going to talk about building a false wall. And Matt, I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between a false wall and a baffle wall?
The baffle. So a false wall really just refers to some sort of framed area in the front of the room, and it's not actually a wall. It'll look like it because you're going to cover it in fabric or something else, as well as a screen. And then behind that usually is a lot of acoustic treatment and speakers. A baffle wall, it actually has a baffle, meaning it's a hard surface, drywall, plywood, something like that, and it fits tightly around the speakers, and so it extends the baffle of the speakers all the way out to the sidewalls, floor, and ceiling. Baffle walls are technically better. They'll give you better performance, but they're less flexible. And the false wall approach is nice because you can put anything in there, but you don't eliminate SBIR, and you actually get fairly substantial 6 dB gain from a baffle wall that you can't get from a false wall installation. And so here I see you've posted a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, so are we talking about baffle wall where the front of the speaker is on the front of the wall?
Yeah, it has to be tight right up against the baffle of the speaker
Yeah.
so it can extend it.
So it's like you can have a cutout for the speakers in the wall.
Yeah, and
Very
technically, an
much.
in-wall speaker in a wall is a that's a baffle wall installation. So, like, I have in-wall speakers mounted in a it's a partial wall, so it's effectively a baffle wall, though.
So pretty much what this center channel is looking like here.
Yeah, it's pretty close. The problem
Yeah.
is I can't tell. It looks like it's a very loose material, so that may not actually be a real baffle wall. But
Mm.
assuming that's hard, like drywall or plywood or something, then yes, that would be a baffle wall.
Well, let's go. Let's type in baffle wall. I typed in false wall because that's what I'm doing. Here we go. That's a baffle wall.
Yes, that is a classic baffle wall design right there. And what they've done, probably obvious. Actually, mine's there. That's funny.
Which one? Oh, there it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Look at that. You like the third option. There you go.
I'm popular, can I say?
Is that
And the
velvet?
other one that's there as well, which is the Meyer Sound one. Those are all classic designs for baffle walls. So there's acoustic material that's put around the speakers because there's sound that will radiate to the sides. But the other reason for it actually is that the sound hits the screen, and even though it's acoustically transparent, it's not perfect. So some of the sound will hit the back of the screen and then come back onto the baffle, and you get this interference pattern that forms because of that, called comb filtering. And so the absorption material helps with that. The other thing is light. If you paint it black, that's actually not as black in terms of light reflectiveness as black fabric. So I used suede. Velvet is actually better yet, but
Yeah.
foam works fine. The idea is just something that's got sort of a flocking like texture to it, helps reduce the amount of light scatter.
Was that what we were talking about yesterday? The micro suede?
But yeah, you were talking about using microshade, and I was saying it's fine. It's not as black as velvet, but it's okay. You won't. This doesn't reflect anywhere near enough light to be noticeable on a baffle wall.
Right, right, right. Yeah, because I want to do that on my walls, but it looks a little shiny. Or is that just because you didn't brush it or whatever to get the strokes out?
It's not shiny. I don't know where you're getting that from.
It looks a little shiny there, dude.
All right, go click on the one above it there, the QSys. I said that was Meyer Sound. That's actually QSC's cinema system.
Let me go back to
It's
that one.
right above
Yep.
mine.
Oh,
Now
this one here.
to the left. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, that
That's
was
like a
cool.
really classic design because they've actually used the material we all used to use until it got crazy expensive, called line acoustics. So standard baffle wall, and then instead of using foam or something like that, what they've done is actually adhered. It's duck liner with a black material on it. So you
Oh,
can see
gotcha.
that's no shinier than mine, and it's used in professional cinemas all the time. That's a good material. If you can get it cheap, it's like one of the best things you can use. The problem is line acoustics has gotten crazy expensive. It's gotten much cheaper to use pretty much anything other than that.
So, doing that, you get rid of the SBIR, which stands for screen boundary,
Speaker boundary
speaker
interference
boundary
response.
interference
Yeah.
response.
So that's when the speaker sits out. I mean, you always are going to have some of that from other walls in the room, but the most dominant speaker boundary interference response patterns we see are actually the distance between the front of the baffle of the speaker and the actual back wall, or front wall, I should say, of the room. And so sound radiates around, and hits
Yeah.
back there, and then it comes back again and interferes with itself. And if you place the speaker in the wall, there's no reflection then off the front wall anymore. Um, And when it extends to the sidewalls, floor, and ceiling, it reduces some of that too, but not completely. So the remaining SBIR then becomes the sidewalls, the floor, the ceiling, and the back wall, but those are never as significant as the front wall one. So often, if you're calibrating a system, for instance, and you see like there's a big null around 80 hertz, it's very often related to that front wall. And it's
So
annoying that
to
that's our crossover point.
so to mitigate that, if you're just building a false wall, wouldn't you line the entire front wall with some kind of absorption? Then you'd hang the speaker in front of it.
Yeah, so you had those pictures up before people had done that. I mean, yes, here's the problem. You need like a foot of insulation. And then what often happens when people do this is that they cover so much of the front wall with insulation to address that issue that the front wall ends up being 100% of the absorption area that the room needs, and the room becomes way too dead. So my
Right.
recommendation is to be very judicious with that, or to actually use absorption that's more base focused, so you can limit the bandwidth of the absorbers by not just having it be raw insulation, but actually have a plate or a cover on it of some kind. And then
Got
that
you.
way you still address a lot of these issues at low frequencies, but you've not over absorbed the room, because really you want some absorption on the sidewalls, on the ceiling, and on the back wall.
Got you. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I will not be doing a baffle wall because since I'm going to be reviewing a lot of speakers, I'm going to have to do the false wall to make swapping speakers out easier. So,
Yeah.
what is so your best option is to place not so much insulation on the front wall, like sporadically place it or
Well, I think we would
strategically?
probably, yes, but I think we would probably cover it with membranes and stuff like that too. So you can do all sorts of different things to help with this. You can put pegboard over it. It's like, it's in terms of cheap tricks. You can put pegboard over it and then put some black fabric over that. You can put membranes, like just even drop cloth plastic. Has been used before. So you want the highest mill you can get, for not the really cheap stuff that's like garbage bag thickness, but like something that's actually pretty nice. So a higher mill thickness of drop cloth plastic. You put that over it. Then you put some fabric. In fact, there's this. It's relatively acoustically transparent. It's weed cloth, so not the kind that looks like woven, but it actually looks like it's made of these swirly fibers that have all been sort of pressed together, and it's kind of papery. And it's used to keep weeds from growing up. That is a really cheap way to cover this. So we could look into that and see if they've. I haven't used it in so long that I don't want to guarantee that the currently available stuff would work for this, but the stuff you used to be able to buy at least was really good. Um, so we could go ahead and do something like that to reduce your amount of absorption area so that it's not so high, but still
Right,
does the job we need it to.
right. And how would that affect how's placing your subwoofers behind a false wall? How does that
So
interact
you
with
can
anything?
see how they've done it here. It's the same thing, whether it's a false wall or a baffle wall. You just place them where you need them. So in many of these scenarios, there's not room. So it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing waveforming, you're going to have to place the subwoofers at very specific locations, and they actually tend to match where the left and the right speakers are, unfortunately. So you have to kind of work around that. You can see, actually, if you go back there, I'll show you, because this is something worth pointing out. So pick the one there that says the THX Cinema baffle wall.
Yep.
Yeah, that is a very classic design. That is
Yeah.
not a good design for a home theater. That is a good design for a
Yikes.
commercial cinema. And here's why. The LFE channels that they've placed there, that's the classic place that Dolby and DTS like you to place the LFE channel subwoofers. But it is not a good place for subwoofers in most home theaters.
Yeah.
The better location to put them is actually where the left and the right, well, actually further out on the other side of the left and right speakers in the corners, because then you get the additional room gain
Yeah.
from that. And it's easier if you then do two more in the back corners to get nice, smooth, even bass everywhere. That
Mm.
location right there is a particularly troublesome location, especially if you're doing four subs. If you're doing waveforming, on the other hand, that's still not the right location, but it's closer. What you could do is actually move those up to the midpoint, roughly the same location where the tweeters are, with
Yep.
just those two subs, and that would be a good waveforming spot. If you do four, it's not quite right.
How would that without waveforming, raising it up, would that how would that affect
No, that
drastically
would
or?
not be a good idea. So then you're going to get that same kind of SBIR problem. You're going to have
Mm.
issues. So it needs to be either on the floor or at the ceiling. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So if you can't put it on the floor, you can put it up towards the ceiling, but it's got to be near a boundary. So it needs to be up against two boundaries then, basically. The floor at
Oh,
the front wall or the ceiling in the front wall.
got you. Yeah, it just can't win. It's either one or the other. It seems.
Yes. Again,
Eh,
unless it's waveforming where you're focusing the bass waves.
yeah. Is there a and you have that now, right? You're doing that right now,
I do have that. Yes.
like on the daily basis,
Yeah.
and you
They don't
think,
take it away. It just works once you set it up.
and so construction of the false wall or baffle wall. What is the what kind of depth would you recommend? What's like the common depth?
So I see people go really crazy with this. They do like 36 inches, things like that, like or a full meter, whatever. It's like if you got massive subwoofers, you need to do that. So the depth of it should equal your deepest speakers, because the idea behind these false walls is to hide the speakers. And so that's how I do it. But I usually try to find low profile speakers and try to keep the depth of it as minimal as possible. So I
Right.
was just working actually on a demo room project where the subwoofers are going to be only like 13 inches deep. And that's actually the deepest thing we have. So the false wall is probably going to be no more than 15 inches deep. You do need a little bit of space between the speaker face and the screen. Ideally, when I say a little bit, like 6 inches. So that starts to increase depth. But
Yeah.
even I'm not doing that. I think I have 3 inches on mine. So what I typically do is just try to take whatever I have for speakers that are going back there and minimize the depth of this false wall based on the depth of the speakers plus how much distance I need. Of course, the screen sits on the wall, so you usually get at least an inch from that alone. So you don't necessarily need to add that extra inch in. So for you, I think I don't remember what you're doing for subwoofers. I guess I bet you that's your determining factor.
Yeah, I got the RBH 1212s, which they're not
RBH
really.
12 clubs.
Yeah, they're not too deep. They're like, well, a
They're
couple
pretty
feet, maybe
deep, I
like
think.
three,
Are they the
two,
ported
maybe two
ones?
feet, 2.5. Yeah, the ported ones.
Goodness, yeah, those are pretty deep. Maybe we can turn them sideways for you.
You mean like pointing upwards?
No, pointing like towards the
RBH
outer
12,
walls,
12.
like sideways, as in instead of pointing towards you, they point towards the sidewall,
Oh, got you. Wanted
just to
that.
reduce depth.
Well, here we go. Let me bring this up. Share the screen here.
Otherwise, you're going to need like a 2 foot deep uh, false wall, which you can do. It's not the end of the world.
I mean, I had planned for three because I thought that would be kind of a good size for like even bigger subs. No, is that too big?
I mean, it just starts to take up. So the problem is you start to eat up a lot of room that you have in the
Yeah,
theater, and the theater starts to shrink too much. I mean, how long is your room again? I don't remember the
24.
24. So you're going to have some stuff on the back walls too that brings you down to 21. You end up with a room that's maybe it's a nice long 24-foot room, and your actual interior space when all is said and done is probably going to be around 20 feet. So it's up to you.
Well, let's see. Let's check the specs really quick here. It is so dual 12s, 92 dB. Depth is 18 inches. Not too huge. Is that right? 18. Yeah. 35 up, 16 height. 18. It's not drastically big. How far would you want the wall to be in front of the subwoofer? Is that going to interact with it?
Not really, other than, okay, so here's where you do start to run into issues. When the subwoofers are placed outside of the screen area, there's not a lot of issue with the subwoofer affecting the screen outside of the fact that subwoofers shake the room, which means it's going to shake the screen. When the subwoofer is sitting right behind the screen, like you have with waveforming, if there is too much, I'm sorry, not enough distance between those woofers and that screen, the movement of the woofers can actually start to notably move the screen.
Yeah.
So you kind of need, like I said, ideally like 6 inches anyway.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean that. I guess that starts to push us back to the idea that your 3 foot false wall might be a good idea, because then that gives us a whole foot between the front of this thing. Like I
Yeah.
said, the other option is don't face the woofer towards the screen, face it sideways. In these environments, that doesn't, as long as it's not creating any kind of weird resonances, that's not going to affect anything.
You don't think having them point outwards or inwards would create some kind of weird cancellation?
It
No.
shouldn't, and you can test it to see. And that's one of the things we could always do. Do you have the subwoofers right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so even like in your empty room, you could just take the subwoofers, wheel them in there, put them at the front before you build anything, hook them up to the amp, take your UMIC one or whatever you have to measure with, um, and run a sweep. turn the subwoofer sideways, run another sweep. I'm going to
So if
guess you're going to get a pretty similar result. The thing that's going to change is the SBIR effect since the driver is now closer to the wall.
right, right, right.
I mean, I do this
Um,
kind of stuff all the time. My subwoofers right now are currently pointed towards each other.
really,
Yeah.
wouldn't it sound better outwards though? Wouldn't the bass waves kind of go hit the
I
wall and
would,
bounce
I
around?
would, no, bass is omnidirectional with these types of subwoofers. They don't have any ability to have any directionality to them.
Um, okay, so since the speakers are only like 6 inches deep, and I'm building a 3 foot wall, would I have to extend the speakers out to be a couple inches from the screen?
No, you
Would
don't
it?
want them a couple inches from the screen. So you want them to have as much reasonable distance to the screen as possible. The only thing you got to watch out for is diffraction surfaces, things around the speakers that they could bounce off of and cause issues. So the way to think of it is this: acoustically transparent screens are pretty good these days, but they're not 100% perfectly transparent. So think of it, even though a woven screen doesn't have like cut holes in it, think of it more like a perf screen. Imagine a woven screen has created these little pores. The wave radiates out of the speaker like a sphere, right? And that spherical sound wave, as it radiates, expands as it gets farther out. The
Mm-hmm.
bigger the distance between the speaker and the screen, the more pores are able to be seen, if you will, by that wavefront because it's gotten that much larger. And so you're talking about that much larger of a surface area. And so the screen has that much less of an effect on the sound. So they actually did a study where they took screens into an anechoic chamber and they tried them with speakers with different distances. And like one of the dominant findings was, I think it was like a full meter between the speaker and the screen had the best effect, had the best response. And like I said, the reason for that is actually pretty obvious when you really think it through. So you're going
Interesting.
to push
Okay.
those back actually as much as you can, get as much distance between the speakers and the screen as you can. And we're just going to have to watch out for the fact that you've got subwoofers that are 2 feet deep and other things in there that the sound can bounce off of.
Right, right, right. Interesting. And what are some best practices for actually building up the screen, building the frame out, and all that? How would you
Yeah,
secure
you
that?
don't want it to rattle. I mean, at the end of the day, when you put these things together and you're building this high performance theater, you've got a lot of shaking force going on there that can cause problems. So, on one hand, you don't want this to be so substantial that it's, like I said, creating a big diffraction source for the speaker, and on the other hand, you don't want it to be so flimsy that when the subs start going, the thing's just shaking like crazy and the screen's rattling off of it and everything. So we almost always build them out of 2x4s. That's pretty standard. If
Yeah.
you're handy and you want to do something fancier, extruded aluminum, the T channel style, like T30, is better yet. It's just expensive, and so that's why I don't typically see people do that. But aluminum like that, you can get these aluminum extrusions that are about the same as a 2x4, but way stronger, and it's not
Yeah.
going to rattle. So if you want to be fancy, that's probably the best material you could use. If you really are trying to do what the rest of us almost always do, it's 2x4 construction. We typically will scissor a couple of 2x4s for at least some of the verticals. And then there's some bracing across, this way. So what you want to do is make sure there's no bracing anywhere near the speakers. I sometimes see people put verticals between the speakers. I would generally suggest against doing that just because what happens is, like I said, you're creating these diffraction zones, if you will. You're creating these places where sound can now radiate
Hmm.
off of the 2x4s from the speakers, and that messes up sound. So actually that one there that says the Savoy AVS one is a mixture of good and bad. If we click on that one, yeah, to your left, there you go.
Yep.
So this one doesn't have any verticals in the way of the speaker, which is
Right.
great. They did create a table, and so there's this surface for the sound to radiate off of below the speaker. That's bad. So the best situation would be something kind of like this, but without the big table. You want
Oh,
to keep it
got you.
kind of
Yeah.
open if possible.
Got
So
you.
the
So
other
maybe
one,
he's.
actually, a better example for that is the audio science review. How is this for a baffle wall thing?
Yep.
See how that has like sort of a framing in front of the speakers and the screen can kind of go on that, but there's nothing anywhere near the speakers other than those two verticals. And that's actually because that's a screen frame. Those
Right.
verticals are the screen frame supports.
Yeah, I got you. Yep.
That is a good design because it's got minimal diffraction sources. That's an actual baffle wall. It's not an open one, but it doesn't change what I'm trying to say here. You want to have as little stuff right in front of the speakers or around them as you can.
So this is a no-no. This guy.
I mean, it's got a yeah, that's got stuff that like unfortunately is going to cause a lot of diffraction. It's just not ideal. This one too
Yeah,
has a lot of stuff that could cause diffraction. All that extra bracing is actually not needed. This is not, remember, this wall doesn't support any weight.
right.
So it doesn't need to be strong. It just needs to be able to hold a screen up and some, fabric covers basically.
So would you do like a just a regular square frame or rectangular frame, whatever frame, and then maybe do some corner brackets to give it a little bit more
I don't
stability?
so I actually usually you don't I mean you could. What I usually do is run another horizontal on the top there.
Yeah,
It comes down where the screen, because that's where the screen itself is going to sit on. I
yeah,
usually try to create a framing for the screen to sit on the top and bottom. The side you could if you wanted to, but you don't need to. Um, so if you do the top and the bottom, then you have a place for the screen to mount and a place for the screen's bottom to rest up against. Or we even sometimes use magnets or hooks to hold the bottom of the screen in place. So
right.
that gives you something to mount to. And then the only other thing besides that you really need to do is make sure you've got a place that you can secure all the trim panels, because the trim panels are going to hide that. Otherwise, you're going to see it.
Yeah,
So that kind of comes back to, what are you doing? Are you doing stretch fabric? If you're doing stretch fabric, the track has to sit against something hard. So you're going to have to make some verticals for that, which I don't love, but if you have to do it, you have to. And you can make them small. If you are not doing stretch fabric, you're doing like MDF panels, for instance, you're just cutting a big opening in and wrapping in fabric and Velcroing it, which I think we've talked about possibly doing with your room. In a
yeah,
scenario like that, they can secure on the top and the bottom. They don't need to secure anywhere else, and it would be fine. So you could basically have your side verticals that are up against the wall, your bottom plate and top plate, and then, like I said, I usually add two more horizontals, one on the bottom, one on the top, that frame the screen area, and then you can just mount everything to that. If you're doing, trying to think what else you could do, I guess you could staple fabric to. Oh, that would look really ugly. I don't know why you do that. I don't know. I think what we just covered is probably your main ways you would go about doing this. The other thing is, when you do have things that are in the way of the speakers in some way that could be a diffraction source, even if they're above or below it, you can always put some acoustic foam on that. I've done that before. It sometimes helps. Sometimes you get some weird wiggles and you're like, I don't know what's causing that. And then you wrap a surface in some acoustic material and it goes away.
right, right, right.
It's amazing what all those little uh, surfaces in the way of the speakers actually do.
Yeah, so I see this guy made some frames here,
Yeah.
some covers. What's your best way to attach that? You would say magnets or no, or really strong magnets?
Really strong. So I'll just tell you, the cheapest, simplest way to do it is going to be industrial Velcro.
Mm,
And you're going to have to make sure the industrial Velcro is well adhered to each side, because I've had it pull off the panels before. But, I usually staple them. And that, it's simple, it's easy, it doesn't rattle. Magnets are like what everybody goes to. And we've done that on a bunch of projects. And it was a huge pain in the butt to get them to work. They rattle. If
right.
they're not strong enough, they fall apart. And then we had one project where the guy went and bought these neodymium super strong magnets. I don't even think they were for cabinets. It was for something else. And it had like a hole through it though for a screw.
Yeah.
When everything came together, we couldn't pull the panels off. And so
Yeah.
we ended up using a crowbar and we broke the panel. So the magnets
Wow.
were so strong that like the wood frame itself couldn't handle the pull force. So I would just say, I think magnets are a cool concept. I don't know that they're actually the best solution.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about a good way for that because I'd want to be able to get review speakers in and out back there and have enough room. And I was also thinking, maybe could you make a false wall that's kind of slidable, like movable? You can move it in and out.
I mean, you can do whatever you want. So the biggest issue I think you're going to find when you start to make things too complicated is you're adding sources of failure and you're adding sources of rattles. So I'm gonna pick on our friend here for a minute, just because this is a neat issue to talk about.
Yeah.
So Michael Stevens, Youth Man, has this
Yeah.
really cool feature on his where you can lift up the screen, and they did
Yeah.
that using parts from a car, basically. So the bottom
Yeah.
of it secures with the latch that you'd have on a trunk, and the mounting system that lifts it up and down is using struts like you'd have on a hood or a trunk.
Yeah. The
It's a
hydraulic
very
thing.
cool
Yeah.
concept. I've seen this done a few times, and here's the problem. At his house and at some of the others that I've seen, they rattle. And it's because there's all these extra mechanisms that weren't really designed to handle the force of all these subwoofers. And so it's not like you can go in and like damp it. You can't add some grease somewhere or some damping compound and get it to go away. It's always there because those parts have to stay free to be able to move and allow the screen to go up and down. And at the same time, you run into this issue. So, like when I was over at his house checking out his system, I kept looking at it like, what can we do for you to try to reduce this? But I mean, it's part of it is when you add hinges and you add struts and you add the latching systems and everything, you're also adding a bunch of metal parts that are going to rattle. So my recommendation is not to overdo these things with cool features, because you do run in the risk of degrading sound basically substantially just for
Right,
some
right.
feature you're probably going to never use.
Yeah, I was just thinking, just maybe doing like a little French cleat, just slide the screen on and off.
Well, French cleat is the standard way screens attach. Yeah. So if
Oh,
that's
is it?
what you
Okay.
mean, then yeah.
Yeah.
Just, and you can do like magnets on the bottom just to keep the screen from floating around.
Got you. Yeah. All right. So
Some of them even come with that.
that seems like the that seems like the winner. All right.
You might
Well, if
need to get
anybody,
your wife or somebody to help you take the screen down. The bigger screens usually are a two-person job.
yeah. Oh, let's talk about the screen material really quick. Quick though, because I think obviously you can be closer to a weave screen, but there's definitely going to have to be some substantial amount of space if you have like a perf screen. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of perf screens, to be honest with you. Having used all the different screen materials over the years, my experience has been that whatever advantage you might get in terms of brightness and
Yeah.
color from the perf screens, you end up losing in the fact that you get that Moyar effect. The like all those little dots cause this sort of a weird bending of the light, if you will, where lines look like they're kind of flexing around the dots.
Yeah.
And it also causes, in my opinion, you can see those holes if you're too close,
Yeah.
and even the micro purse. And we're often wanting to get the biggest possible screen for a given room and a given seating distance. And we're also talking now about 4K plus. I mean, the JVCs have 8K. It's 4K for the panel, but they're still doing pixel shifting. That's a legitimate way of adding extra pixels. So you run the risk, I think, with those systems of those micro perfs actually degrading the video quite a bit. Gene did it. He hated it and
Oh
ended up
yeah.
switching it out with a woven one.
Yeah.
I've been doing woven now for like at least 10 years, and it's just been my preferred approach. The ones that I like are very spandexy like. It's not actually spandex, but it kind of looks and feels like thick spandex.
Yeah.
Um, Chris Seymour at Seymour Screen Excellence and Seymour AV is a friend. I've used his screens now on like all my projects lately. My own screen is from him. I love his Neo material. I think it's the best on the market that I've used. It's what I recommend to people. But anything of that type, I think, is good.
Yeah. That's what I've been using the Stewart Harmony screens. It looks like you said, it looks like spandex. I remember
Yep.
making a spandex screen like before I was on YouTube, and it looks very similar to it.
I suspect that the actual core material probably is a related weave and everything. He could be not correct. Chris tells me that the gain of white spandex, like we all had been, because I did that once too. He insisted that the gain on that is like 0.5.
Really?
Yeah, and the gain on his material I think is 0.9 or 0.92 or something like that. And a lot of the competitors it's like 0.85 or so. I think the
Yeah. Yeah. I
Harmony's
think
about
this Stewart is like point 0.7. I think it is
zero point
point 0.7
0.7.
something.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
right. So I don't know. I actually had asked Jason Dustle if he thought he could measure some of these materials, because I've got a whole bunch of samples from all the major manufacturers that I did
Hmm.
acoustic testing on, and I was curious I mean, some of them are big. I actually have two that are an entire screen's worth of fabric, and I was curious if he'd be able to test gain, and he said it's a lot harder, easier said than done, a lot harder to actually do that.
All
And
right.
have it
Okay.
be valid and accurate. So he wasn't keen on trying that, but maybe we'll do something where we'll just post a bunch of the samples on top of a reference white and take pictures and see if it's just obvious that, hey, this is supposed to be 1.0 gain. What do the rest look like?
Right. Well, I think a good video for next week would be seating distance to your screen
I
for
should do a
one row
layout
or
video
two
then if
rows.
we're going to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so we'll keep that on the schedule for next week. But we are coming
Well,
up
wait,
at
hold on. I'm going to be
yeah.
gone next week. I'll be in
Oh,
Costa
okay.
Rica, getting eaten by monkeys, but the
Oh,
week
okay, okay.
after that.
Yeah, we. Oh, I've actually got Trent is coming on talk about speaker placement next week. So
Oh,
yeah,
there you go.
so in 2 weeks then.
But here
So
is a teaser for it. I'll just say the screen angles that we now recommend are dramatically different than they used to be, and most people are still citing the old angles.
look at that little teaser from Matt Poes. But guys, I know Matt's got some few Q&A videos on his channel, which is Pose Acoustics. Is that correct?
Yeah, Pose Acoustics.
So links down in the video description. Matt, thanks for stopping by again this week for another episode of Turn My Spare Room into a Home Theater.
No problem.
So, guys, thanks for watching. Any comments, leave them down in the comment section. And if you have any topics that you want to talk about in a future episode, drop them down in the comment section as well. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.